Hey guys, how's it going? So I'm here to talk about the Aeneid by Virgil. I recently read this as a buddy read with Elena Macredina and Crystal of Biblioatlas. This is my second time reading this. The first time I read it in the Rolf Humphreys translation. And this time I read it in the Alan Mandelbaum translation. This translation was published back in the 1970s, I believe, but it won the National Book Award for translation. And it was an absolutely beautiful translation. Just yeah, great poetry, very beautiful, and a really eloquent introduction as well. But anyway, the Aeneid. So this epic poem was written during the reign of Augustus, Caesar Augustus, when the Roman Empire was new and just coming into its own after the fall of the Republic. Virgil was actually commissioned to write the Aeneid by Augustus himself, because Augustus wanted a great national epic for the new Roman Empire, and he wanted it both to sort of solidify the sort of national character of Rome, to give the people of Rome a sense that they were a nation together, even though they were being ruled by an empire, but also to sort of glorify Augustus himself. The idea was that Virgil would write this great epic where Augustus, or a stand-in for Augustus, Aeneas, the main character of the Aeneid, is supposed to be a sort of stand-in for Augustus. The idea was that the hero of this epic would be this great warrior, this noble, upright figure who, was going to found Rome and sire the great dynasty that would, of course, lead to Augustus himself and to Julius Caesar as well before him. Uh, actually, a funny tidbit of information before I go on is that Virgil was actually Augustus's last choice to be the poet to write this epic. Before approaching Virgil to write it, he had approached Horace and Catullus and Ovid and Tibullus. All of those poets except Tibullus, I have read at least some of their work, and they're all great, brilliant poets. I don't really know about Tibullus, but I'm guessing he was good. But I just they all obviously turned down the offer to write the Aeneid, and it just amuses me that this great monument of Western literature was written by a poet who was essentially the last choice to actually write the epic. And it's funny because you could argue that the Aeneid has had more influence than any of those other poets that Augustus approached the first time. Perhaps Ovid outdoes him. I prefer Ovid personally, but anyway, that's not the point of this video. So the Aeneid, as I've already said, tells the story of Aeneas. And Aeneas is a Trojan warrior who fought in the Trojan War. And at the beginning of the Aeneid, we see the destruction of Troy. And Aeneas escapes with his father, Ascanius, his elderly father, and his young son. Or no, his father is named Anchises, and his young son, is named Ascanius. And he escapes with them, as well as a ragtag group of Trojans from the destruction of Troy by the Greeks using the famous Trojan horse. Essentially, the story of the Aeneid is the fulfillment of a prophecy about Aeneas, that he will go and he will found this great city that will be the center of a great empire, which will of course be the Roman Empire, and of course the royal line that Aeneas will sire will of course lead to Julius Caesar, and in turn to Caesar Augustus. And so the first half of the Aeneid is really taken up with Aeneas and the Trojans' wanderings around the Mediterranean. They sort of don't know where they're going. They're told about this prophecy, or well, I don't think they're told about the prophecy, but anyway, at first they're just kind of fleeing from the ruins of Troy, and trying to find Italy, which they've been told to go to, where they will find a new homeland. They are told by the gods, and they end up sort of washing up on the shores of North Africa, where they are found and taken in by Dido, who is the queen of Carthage. So there, while they're there, Aeneas actually falls in love with Dido while he's staying with her, and he sort of forgets about this whole prophecy business of going to Italy and founding the Roman Empire. and is happy to just sort of settle down with Dido and marry her and presumably have children with her, but then is told by the gods, by Jupiter, that he must leave her and go and fulfill his duty, and he does so. He abandons Dido very insensitively. He tries to actually sneak away without even telling Dido that he's leaving to avoid confronting her. But then she discovers him and confronts him, and he sort of gives this really long speech to her about how she can't blame him and how she's guilty of the same thing that he's doing right now. And yeah, he's just incredibly callous when he leaves. And so he leaves, and Dido, in despair and in anger, first she curses Aeneas and says that her people, the Carthaginians, will forever be the sworn enemies of Aeneas's people. So that presages the Punic Wars that will take place between Rome and Carthage, and she also commits a very extensive and over the top suicide. Which is one of the most moving parts of the book. And then after that, Aeneas goes to Italy to try to found this city. But before he goes to Italy, he visits the underworld, where he sees the spirits of the dead going into the underworld. And he sees in the underworld the different layers of the underworld, the different places where people who've committed different sins and have sort of who have sort of achieved differing levels of righteousness or unrighteousness are punished. And he finally arrives at Elysium, where the best people go, and he meets his father, Anchises, who has recently died on the voyage, and Anchises formally tells him about this prophecy about the empire that he will found and the great royal dynasty that he will found. And he also actually sees Dido, who refuses to speak to him. So that's quite a poignant moment. But then after that, he goes to Italy and arrives in a place called Latium, where King Latinus rules. And Latinus has a daughter named Lavinia, and Aeneas essentially wants to marry Lavinia to sort of start his connection to this royal family that is in Latium, because they have no sons. So if he marries Lavinia, the daughter, he will take over the kingdom after Latinus dies. But another man, Turnus, also wants to marry Lavinia, and so the followers of Turnus and the followers of Aeneas kind of duke it out for the rest of the book. And the rest of the book is mostly just this war between Aeneas and his allies and Turnus's followers. And yeah, so that's kind of the bare bones skeleton of the Aeneid. There are a lot of different sort of little anecdotes and twists and turns, but that is the main summary. And yeah, so it is the biggest interest for me in the Aeneid is its relation to Dante's Divine Comedy, because that's a book I love. Obviously, in the chapter where Aeneas goes down into the underworld, you can see the influence on the Divine Comedy, because you have the different layers of the underworld where different people who committed different sins are being punished in sort of manners that are commensurate with the sin that they have committed, which is pretty much what Dante did in the Inferno. And we also see Elysium, so you can see Paradiso in that. And yeah, so you can see definitely the influence on Dante. You can also, I think, see why in medieval Europe, why the Aeneid was interpreted as a sort of Christian allegory for salvation, because Aeneas rejects the sort of way of nature, as you might call it, which is sort of represented by his love of Dido, and decides instead to follow his duty and do what the gods tell him to do, as a Christian would want to do, follow, I guess, God's commandments. And you can sort of see why medieval Europe interpreted it as a Christian allegory, even though Virgil was obviously not a Christian. I also just wanted to add here one observation that I thought was very interesting, a sort of contrast between the Aeneid and Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. In the world of Homer, and I think generally in Greek mythology, you generally see that the younger generations of warriors, like the son of Achilles, the son of Odysseus, Telemachus, and others, you generally see that the younger generations are not as good as their parents. They're not as strong. They're not as smart. you always kind of see in Greek mythology, the best things are always kind of passing away. You know, you have Achilles who dies, you have Odysseus who is going to die, and so on. And that seems to be a contrast with the outlook put forth in the Aeneid, where Aeneas is going to go and he's going to bring the Trojans to Italy, and then his son Ascanius is going to found a great royal dynasty and going to found this great empire that's going to take over the world. So you kind of see there a contrast because it's the younger generations who are going to found this empire and take over, as the Romans saw it, take over the known world. And that seems to me a much more modern way of looking at the world. You know, I think that really sort of presages the sort of positivist outlook of the 19th century, where there was this outlook that everything was getting better, everything was improving, our lives were getting, standard of living was increasing, we were progressing toward this better and better society, which obviously came all crashing down in the 20th century with the two world wars and many other events. So I don't know. I just saw this interesting contrast between the Greeks and the Romans in that sense, and I'd love to hear if anyone has thoughts on that, and whether that's a thing that's been sort of corroborated by other scholars of this area who are obviously more educated in these classics than I am. But anyway, yeah. So sorry that I had to insert this, but back to the main part. But Aeneas is he's an ambiguous character. You know, there's a bit of a tension with regards to Aeneas between what we're told to think about him by the narrator, who keeps calling him pious, keeps calling him upright and righteous, and like he's this noble guy, and between what we're shown Aeneas doing, because his actions don't seem very noble a lot of the time, even when he's doing what on paper he should be doing, following what the gods tell him to do. It doesn't come off as very noble, like when he leaves Dido. It leads to Dido's suicide. On paper, again, he's doing his duty to the gods. He's ostensibly being righteous, but he's abandoning the woman he loves. I mean, he does love her. It is made clear that he loves her, and she loves him. So you can see the sort of callousness that comes with absolute commitment to duty and what the gods tell you, or what God tells you, if you're a Christian. And also, I mean, there are points where he definitely isn't righteous by the standards that Virgil should be using. There are instances of him killing an enemy in cold blood, even though the enemy was begging for mercy and was yielding to him. Actually, the last scene in the Aeneid is of Turnus, the rival for Lavinia's hand in marriage, begging for mercy, yielding to Aeneas, and begging for mercy, asking him just to, give him a good proper burial after he dies, because he's been wounded in the fight, so he probably will die. But and Aeneas has resolved not to give him that, and strikes him dead. Again, in cold blood. And actions like that really call into question Aeneas's true uprightness. And even going back to Dido, the fact that he tried to sneak away from Dido, wouldn't a really upright, good person, sort of suck it up and confront Dido and go to her and tell him what he's doing? She might still have not responded very well, but still, wouldn't a good person have done that? So he's ambiguous. He's a fascinating character, but he's very ambiguous, as I suppose the best characters are. Yeah, and that sort of speaks to Virgil's views on Augustus, because again, this hero was supposed to be, glorified. He was supposed to be a great man. But Virgil is here showing us a man who is not so great. And so you can see a subtle commentary in it on Augustus by Virgil. And the reason that Virgil got away with it, actually, was because the only sections... he was careful, because at one point Virgil actually read out sections of the Aeneid to Augustus, and Augustus liked them very much. But the sections that he read out were the parts where Aeneas was looking good, where he was doing his duty. I think he read to him the books 2 and 3, where Aeneas is traveling across the Mediterranean. He encounters Scylla and Charybdis, much like Odysseus does in the Odyssey. He encounters the Cyclops, like Odysseus. And so those are the parts that he read to Augustus, and those parts really do portray Aeneas as this sort of ragtag individualist hero going, pursuing his duty. And those were the sections that he read to Augustus, so Augustus thought, and Augustus didn't read the rest of the book once it was published, because I don't think Augustus really read. So that's why Virgil got away with this sort of subtle commentary. But anyway, so yeah, Aeneas is a fascinating character. Some final notes on this book. The second half, where sort of the war is taking place, the second half, for me, gets very tedious. Kind of like parts of the Iliad, where you have just kind of so-and-so fought so-and-so, and so-and-so won, and then so-and-so went and killed such and such died in this manner, and then here's a simile about how he's dying, and then so-and-so fought so-and-so, and here's a simile about how they fought, and so-and-so killed so-and-so, and so-and-so now is on a rampage, and he's killing 50 people, and so-and-so and so-and-so, and so on like that. And that gets very tedious. There's a lot of that in the second half of the Aeneid. There are some interesting moments, but yeah, that makes the second half very tedious. I found the first half very interesting. And so yeah, I would call this not really my favorite ancient epic, again, because it does get tedious. And again, I'm interested in it in large part because of its influence on Dante. So it does make me eager to reread Dante at some point. But in terms of as a reading experience, I don't love this one as much as, for example, the Iliad or the Odyssey or Dante. So anyway, yeah, those are some thoughts on the Aeneid. I didn't have as much to say as I usually do, but there you have it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you have them. If you like the Aeneid, if you don't like the Aeneid, whatever. I would love to hear. And anyway, yeah, so I will post this, and I will talk to you all in my next video. Bye, guys.